Hey, my name is Peter. I'm 65 years old. And last night my own daughter-in-law shoved me into the freezing river. As the water closed over my head, she whispered that my $4.6 billion fortune would finally be hers. She thought the current would swallow me forever, but I didn't die. I survived, and that was the first mistake she'll never forget. Before I tell you how betrayal nearly cost me my life, I want to ask you something. What would you do if your own family tried to erase you for money? Let me know in the comments. And also tell me which city and country you're watching from, so I can thank you personally. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more true stories like this. My story doesn't begin with the river. It begins with a man who once believed family meant safety. My name is Peter Marshall, and for the last 40 years, I built a fortune from scratch. A small idea in my garage turned into one of the biggest tech empires in the country. By the time I turned 65, I was worth $4.6 billion. I had everything, except the one thing money couldn't buy: love and loyalty from my family. I lost my wife, Margaret, 5 years ago. She was my anchor, my partner in every sense. When she passed, the house became too quiet, too large, too empty. My son David was all I had left of her, and I tried my best to bridge the distance between us. But David had married Melissa, a woman whose beauty turned heads and whose ambition cut deeper than any knife. Melissa was everything Margaret wasn't. Where Margaret was kind and modest, Melissa was flashy and arrogant. She wore her diamonds like armor, treated staff like dirt, and saw every room as a stage where she could play the lead. From the beginning, I felt the chill of her disdain. The way she spoke to me, always with a forced sweetness that barely covered the steel beneath. I remember one evening, shortly after Margaret's funeral, I invited David and Melissa for dinner, hoping to feel a trace of family warmth again. The table was set with Margaret's favorite china. Halfway through the meal, Melissa tapped her glass with her manicured nail and laughed. "Peter, you should think about retirement. Leave the business to younger hands. Enjoy, well, whatever time you have left." Her words cut, but David just shifted uncomfortably, not meeting my eyes. That was the moment I understood Melissa's influence over him. She didn't just share his life, she steered it. Still, I wanted to believe I could trust them. That maybe, despite her sharp tongue, Melissa cared about David, and by extension about me. So I overlooked the comments, the power plays, the way she looked at my estate as if it were already hers, but my heart never fully rested. At night, I would sit in my study, turning Margaret's silver locket over in my hands, hearing her voice. In my memory, "Peter, don't let money blind you to people's true faces." The years passed and I kept trying. I funded David's ventures, bought Melissa gifts, hosted family gatherings. I told myself that one day they'd see me as more than a wallet. One day they'd remember I was a father, not just a fortune. But that hope shattered by the riverbank. Melissa had suggested we take a walk that evening, just the two of us. "It'll be good for your health, Peter," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I should have sensed the danger. The air was cold, the water rushing dark below us. We paused near the edge, and she leaned close. Her voice was low, almost tender. "You've lived long enough, Peter. Don't worry, your billions won't go to waste." And before I could react, her hands shoved me hard into the icy current. Melissa's shove was sudden, sharp, and merciless. My body toppled forward, the world tilting as the icy wind rushed past my ears. For a split second, I thought it was some sick joke, that she would grab my arm and laugh. But then gravity claimed me, and I plunged into the freezing river. The shock of the water was unbearable. It bit into my skin like knives, forcing the air out of my lungs. I thrashed, trying to break the surface, but the current dragged me under. The taste of mud and salt filled my mouth as darkness swallowed the light above. Through the roar of water, I heard her voice faintly echo from the riverbank. "Goodbye, Peter. Enjoy your eternity." The betrayal burned hotter than the cold. This wasn't just a shove, it was an execution. My daughter-in-law had decided my life was worth nothing compared to the billions in my name. My chest screamed for air. My arms, heavy with age, fought against the current. My mind raced with fragments of memory, Margaret's laughter, David's childhood smile, the promise I had made to protect my family's legacy. Was this how it would end? Drowned like an unwanted secret? No, not yet. I clawed upward, my fingers breaking the surface long enough to snatch a breath before the river pulled me down again. My heart pounded, my body weakening. The weight of 65 years pressed against me, whispering that maybe Melissa was right, that I was too old, too frail. Then, in the chaos, my hand struck something solid, a half-submerged log drifting with the current. I latched onto it with every ounce of strength left in me. My fingernails tore, my arms burned, but I held on. The river carried me downstream, away from the house, away from Melissa's gaze. I don't know how long I drifted. Minutes? Hours? My mind blurred, half-conscious. The stars above spun, cold air biting my face when I dared to lift it. I clung to that log like it was the last anchor between me and death. Finally, dim lights flickered on the shore, lanterns from a small fishing cabin. I tried to cry out, but my throat only croaked. Still, the sound must have carried, because I saw a figure rush toward the water. Strong arms grabbed me, dragging me onto the muddy bank. I coughed violently, river water spilling from my lungs. My vision cleared enough to see a weathered face framed by a thick grey beard. "You're alive," the man muttered, his voice gravelly but kind. "How in God's name did you end up in there?" I clutched his sleeve, trembling. "Please, don't tell anyone. They think I'm dead. It has to stay that way." He studied me, confused, then nodded slowly. "Name's Frank. I won't ask questions tonight. Let's get you warm before you freeze." He half carried me into his cabin, laying me beside a crackling fire. My clothes clung to me, heavy and soaked, but the heat seeped into my bones. Frank covered me with a wool blanket and handed me a steaming mug. My hand shook so badly that half the tea spilled. Between ragged breaths, I whispered, "My daughter-in-law. She tried to kill me. She wants my fortune." Frank's eyes narrowed. "You're Peter Marshall, aren't you? I've seen your face in the papers." I nodded weakly. He exhaled, rubbing his beard. "If you're telling me the truth, then you've just cheated death. But what are you going to do now?" I stared into the fire, my jaw set. Melissa thought I was gone, and the world would soon believe it too. That gave me a chance. A chance to see her unmasked, to expose her lies, and to protect the legacy Margaret and I had built. "I'm going to let them bury me," I said quietly, "and when the time is right, I'll come back." Frank nodded slowly, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "Then you'd better stay here until you're ready. No one will find you in this cabin." As the flames crackled, I lay back against the rough pillow, my body aching, my heart heavy. Melissa thought she had ended me with one push, but she had no idea she had just created the worst enemy she could imagine. A man who had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. For the next 2 days, I remained hidden in Frank's cabin, nursing bruises and replaying Melissa's voice in my head. Outside, the river kept rushing past, carrying with it the secret of my survival. Meanwhile, in the world I had built, news broke that Peter Marshall was gone. Frank returned one evening with an old newspaper tucked under his arm. The headline screamed across the page, "Billionaire Peter Marshall presumed dead after river accident." I stared at the photo they had used, an old image of me at a charity gala, smiling politely in a tuxedo. The article quoted officials, speculating I had slipped during a walk and been swept away. Not a word about Melissa, not a whisper of foul play. On the day of my funeral, Frank insisted I stay behind, but I couldn't. I needed to see with my own eyes what masks people would wear when they believed I was gone. I pulled a worn cap low, over my brow, wrapped a scarf high around my face, and stood at the back of the crowded church. The room was filled with suits and black dresses. My employees, politicians, socialites, everyone eager to pay respects to the fortune as much as the man. At the front sat my son David, stiff and hollow-eyed. Beside him, Melissa dabbed at her cheeks with a silk handkerchief, tears flowing on command. But her performance wasn't for me. It was for them, for the cameras, the investors, the whispering crowd. I leaned against the wooden wall at the back, my fists clenched. When the priest spoke about my legacy, Melissa leaned close to David and whispered. I couldn't hear, but I watched her lips form the words, "It's all ours now." David didn't respond. He just stared ahead, pale and numb. After the service, mourners gathered around Melissa, offering sympathy. She thanked them sweetly, her diamond bracelet catching the light, her voice dripping with practiced sorrow. Only I knew that beneath those crocodile tears lay triumph. Outside, near the cemetery gates, I overheard her speaking with a woman in a sharp grey suit, Claudia Mercer, an estate lawyer with a reputation for ruthless efficiency. Everything is in motion, Claudia assured her. Within weeks, the assets will transfer seamlessly. No one will question it. You'll have control of the estate, the foundations, even the board seats. Melissa's lips curled into a smile. Finally, the empire I deserve. I felt bile rise in my throat. Margaret had always warned me that arrogance wears fine clothes. Now I saw it plainly. As the mourners dispersed, I turned away, my heart heavy. They had buried an empty casket, believing my body lost to the river. But the man they mourned was not dead. He was watching, he was planning. Melissa thought she had won. But she had only given me the greatest advantage I could have ever asked. And for time to see her true face without disguise. That night back in Frank's cabin, I made a decision. If I wanted justice, I couldn't rely on grief or fury alone. I needed proof. I needed to uncover every string Melissa and Claudia were pulling, and then I would cut the entire web down around them. I called the only person I trusted outside of Frank, Laura Kane, a private investigator I had once hired years ago to look into corporate fraud. Laura was sharp, discreet and relentless. She arrived 2 nights later, her dark hair pulled back, her coat dusted with snow. When she stepped into Frank's cabin and saw me alive, her eyes widened. Peter. The news. The funeral. I know, I said. To the world, I'm dead, and that's how it needs to stay, at least for now. Laura crossed her arms, her brow furrowed. So who pushed you? My daughter-in-law, Melissa. Laura exhaled, shaking her head. I always said that woman had shark eyes. We sat by the fire as I told her everything, the shove, the cold, the fake tears, the whispered promises of billions. When I finished, Laura leaned forward. If you want revenge, you'll need evidence, paper trails, recordings, witnesses. Something ironclad. Otherwise, she'll claim you slipped, or worse, that you're delusional, I nodded. And Claudia Mercer is helping her. I heard it myself. Laura's lips tightened. Claudia Mercer. She's been on my radar. I've traced her name to 3 suspicious estate cases, wealthy elders who died suddenly, their fortunes tied up in convenient trusts, families divided, lawsuits buried. It reeks of orchestration. She pulled a thin folder from her bag and spread documents on the table. Look here, Project Legacy. It's a file I intercepted months ago. Claudia's name is all over it. It outlines how to seize estates when heirs are weak or divided. And look at this. She slid over a photo. Melissa, sitting at a cafe with Claudia. My stomach knotted. It was worse than I thought. Melissa wasn't just greedy. She was a willing pawn in Claudia's larger scheme. We'll need more, Laura continued. Financial statements, recordings, anything to tie Melissa directly to Claudia's network. If we catch Claudia, Melissa falls with her. Over the next weeks, Laura worked like a shadow. She tapped into Melissa's calls, trailed Claudia's meetings, sifted through bank transfers. What she found chilled me. Offshore accounts in Melissa's name, sudden property purchases, and coded emails. Between Claudia and her associates, meanwhile, Frank proved himself invaluable. With his fisherman's roots and quiet reputation, he smuggled Laura's findings in and out without raising suspicion. At night, he taught me to use the recording equipment, showing me how to clip a mic inside a jacket or plant a bug under a desk. One evening, Laura placed a small device on the table. "This," she said, "is our key. We'll plant it in Melissa's mansion. She's careless when she thinks she's alone. And when she talks about the inheritance, we'll have her." I held the device, the metal warm in my palm. My pulse quickened. For the first time since the river, I felt power return to my hands. Melissa believed she had buried me. Claudia believed she had covered her tracks. But I was alive, and I was coming. For them, the weeks that followed were a strange rhythm of silence and secrets. By day, I remained hidden in Frank's cabin, reading every report Laura brought me. By night, I replayed Melissa's voice in my head, her laughter at the funeral, her whispers to Claudia Mercer. Each word fueled the fire inside me. Laura had planted the recording device in Melissa's mansion during a charity gala. The bug sat beneath a marble side table, invisible to the eye but sharp to the ear. Every evening, she and I would sit by the fire, headphones on, listening to Melissa in her most unguarded moments. Melissa's voice oozed arrogance. "I can't believe how easy it was," she told a friend over champagne. "One little shove, and now the world cries for poor widowed Melissa." Another night her tone was colder, sharper, directed at Claudia. "So when does the transfer finish?" Claudia's calm reply: "Patience. The accounts move slowly when billions are involved. But rest assured, your control is inevitable." Each word was a dagger, but also a gift. Proof. Meanwhile, Laura traced wire transfers across the globe. From shell companies in the Cayman Islands to fake charities in Zurich, the pattern was undeniable. Melissa was laundering money under Claudia's instruction, preparing to swallow the empire Margaret and I had built. Frank kept watch, always with his fisherman's patience. He never asked for details, but each time he returned with supplies, he'd nod toward me. "You're getting closer. I can see it in your eyes." At night, I practiced my return. I stood before the cracked mirror in the cabin, wearing the suit Frank had pressed for me. I imagined walking into a room where Melissa thought she reigned. I pictured her face when she saw the man she buried standing alive before her. The plan formed piece by piece. We would wait for Melissa's next grand event, a dinner where she would boast about her new control. Laura would ensure the FBI listened in, evidence lined up, warrants ready, and I, the ghost she thought gone, would walk into that room and pull the ground out from under her. Melissa was celebrating too early, and that was her greatest mistake. The night came sooner than I expected. Melissa hosted a lavish dinner party at the estate, the house blazing with chandeliers, the air thick with perfume and expensive wine. Politicians, investors, and lawyers filled the grand hall. She floated among them like a queen, her gown dripping with jewels, her laughter loud enough to echo against the marble walls. At her side was David, pale and quiet, a ghost of the son I once knew. I waited in the shadows, outside, my heart pounding. Laura stood beside me, her hand resting on the small recording device in her pocket. "The agents are in position," she whispered. "Once you go in, there's no turning back." I nodded. "That's the point." Inside, Melissa raised her glass. "To new beginnings," she declared, "to an empire stronger than ever." The guests clinked their glasses. She smiled, glowing in the spotlight. "Some of you doubted me," she continued. "But now the Marshall legacy is in capable hands." My hands, the room applauded, and then the applause stilled because the doors opened and I walked in. Gasps filled the air. Forks clattered to plates. A woman shrieked. David's face went pale as marble. Melissa froze, her glass slipping from her fingers and shattering against the floor. I stood tall in my black suit, Margaret's locket gleaming against my chest. My voice was steady, sharper than any knife. "Did you miss me, Melissa?" The silence was deafening. "You," Melissa stammered, "you're supposed to be dead." I stepped forward. "That's what you wanted, wasn't it? That's what you told Claudia Mercer when you thought no one was listening. But the river didn't take me. It gave me back my life. And the truth." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Claudia, seated near the back, stiffened in her chair. I reached into my pocket and pressed play on a recorder. Melissa's voice filled the hall. One little shove, and now the world cries for poor widowed Melissa, the guests gasped. David's jaw dropped. Another clip followed, Claudia's voice smooth and damning. "The accounts move slowly when billions are involved, but rest assured your control is inevitable." Melissa lunged forward, panic in her eyes. "This is fake. He's lying." But at that moment the doors burst open again, this time with FBI agents swarming the room. Laura stepped in behind them, holding up a badge. "Not fake, evidence." The agents moved swiftly. One seized Claudia as she tried to slip toward the exit. Another pinned Melissa's wrists as she shrieked and fought, her jewels scattering across the floor like broken promises. David collapsed into his chair, burying his face in his hands. Melissa screamed, her mask shattered. "David, tell them I didn't." But David didn't move. His voice cracked as he whispered, "I should have stopped you. God help me, I should have stopped you." The agents dragged Melissa and Claudia out, their protests echoing into the night. The guests, wide-eyed, parted silently as I stood at the center of the chaos. I looked around the hall, the empire Margaret and I had built, nearly stolen by greed and betrayal. My gaze lingered on David. "I gave you everything," I said quietly, "and you let her take it from both of us." He lifted his head, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry, Dad, but sorry wouldn't bring back the trust we had lost." As the agents closed the doors, Laura placed a hand on my shoulder. "It's over, you've won." I nodded, though my heart felt heavy. Winning didn't feel like triumph. It felt like survival. Still, as I looked at the faces of the stunned guests, I knew one thing. The truth had risen from the river with me, and no amount of greed could drown it again. The trial was swift once the evidence surfaced. Recordings, bank transfers, false documents, all laid bare for the court. Melissa, once draped in jewels and arrogance, now sat in a plain jumpsuit, her eyes darting like a cornered animal. She was charged with attempted murder, conspiracy to defraud, and money laundering. Claudia Mercer faced an even longer list of crimes. Her empire of deceit unraveled, connecting her to multiple suspicious estates and fraudulent inheritances. The judge's gavel echoed as she was sentenced to decades behind bars. David testified against his own wife. His voice shook, his hands trembled, but he finally admitted what he had known deep down, that Melissa had poisoned his mind and that his silence had nearly cost me my life. When it was over, the court ruled in my favor. The estate remained intact. The martial fortune would not be tainted by Melissa's greed or Claudia's schemes. David came to me outside the courthouse, his face pale, his shoulders heavy with shame. "I'm so sorry, Dad," he whispered. "I should have seen her for who she was." I looked at him for a long moment. He was still my son, but trust is not something that money or apologies can buy back once it's broken. "Blood gives us family, David," I said quietly, "but choices decide if we keep it." He lowered his head and I turned away. Some wounds never close completely. Justice had been served, but peace, that was something I would have to rebuild. Months later, I walked once more along the riverbank where Melissa had tried to end my life. The water still rushed cold and merciless, but this time I felt no fear, only clarity. I had established the Marshall Foundation, dedicating a large portion of my fortune to scholarships for underprivileged youth and to restoring rivers across the country. My billions would no longer be a prize for the greedy. They would be a tool for the deserving. Frank, the fisherman who saved me, became the foundation's first honorary board member. Laura, ever sharp and loyal, continued as my advisor, and David. He was rebuilding too. Distance remained between us, but I saw him at counseling sessions, trying to become the man his mother would have wanted. I touched Margaret's locket, feeling its familiar weight against my chest. She would have been proud that I chose not vengeance, but justice, not destruction, but legacy. The river tried to claim me once. Instead, it carried me to the truth. And in that truth, I found a second chance. Not just for myself, but for what I would leave behind. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted most? Tell me your story in the comments. I read everyone. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true stories like this. Because sometimes survival isn't just about living. It's about showing the world that no one, not even family, can drown the truth forever.